fellow citizens of all nations. Right now I'm going to talk about Plato's cave analogy, and I find this analogy one of the greatest thoughts that man ever had in this written history, because this analogy is simply mind-boggling. Like, this is just beautiful analogy, and one of those analogies which stays with you for a very long period of time, and you often question whether you are one of those person in cave. But what is very interesting is that, of course, there exists lots of interpretations of this analogy, and different people or different ideologies usually try to use this analogy and say that, hey, you live in a cave and you don't know the truth about beautiful creature or this beautiful ideology that exists. Usually different people or different ideologies try to use this cave example and tell you that you have no clue about anything. Now, what I really think about this cave analogy, and let's summarize a little bit what the cave analogy is all about. Just imagine a human being that is born and raised in a cave, and he is chained in this cave, and he cannot just leave the cave. And then the outside world exists outside of the cave, basically, is the real world, where the cave is just a false world, and people there see the shadows of the real world. And they consider the shadows to be some sort of signs and some sort of symbols, and they give each other status based on what kind of shadow they will see, whatever it is. And what Plato tries to tell us in this story is that, imagine if you were born in this type of situation and you left this type of environment. You were born in this type of environment, you were raised in this type of environment, and you left. And the question is the following. Would you be able to go outside first time in your life and just look at the sun directly? Right? You would not be able to just look at the sun because you have never seen the sun. So what would you do? The first thing what you would do the first time you leave this cave is that you would try to look at the image. You would see the water, and you would try to look in the water and try to see the shadow of the sun. And let's say that in this situation which I'm explaining to you, the sun is the greatest truth. The first time, right, you would not just be able to look at the sun. So what you do? You would look at this water. After that, you will look at the sun finally, after some time. And later you would realize the truth, that you lived in a cave and what you thought, it wasn't the truth at all. And you would end up feeling pity for the people who you left behind in the cave, and you would try to return and tell them the truth about the world. But what would really happen to you if you were to return? Do you think your fellow cavemen who give each other status based on what kind of shadow they will see and etc., and that they're the ones that grew up in this cave, and they'll never leave the cave, they would be grateful to you, they would welcome you if you were to return? No, they would punish you, they would dig your eyes out, they would chain you, they would torture you, they would never accept you. They would consider you a madman. But at the same time, for you as a person who left the cave and what's seen the outside, would you consider the people who are in the cave anything? Would you respect them? Would you look at these people and be like, oh, I wish I was them in any form or shape? Even would you be like that, or would you disregard whatever they consider valuable? You would just consider that thing some sort of nonsense because you have seen the real world, and it was not easy for you to see the real world. Your eyes hurt, you felt the pain, you felt the suffering, but you still persisted and you managed to see the real world. Now, what people try to say about this analogy is that it is sort of an interpretation of the upper world, basically. Plato mentions the upper world. And we can understand it directly, that this planet is some sort of a cave, and there's another upper planet, an upper world. But what Plato himself says in the book is that this is not about that. It's about man's intellectual ascendant. This analogy, or so he claims, is about how man ascends intellectually. And when we look at this way, right, man's ascendance intellectually to a higher place, we would find this sort of question intriguing, because on one hand, what it means to ascend intellectually, and on the other hand, what it means to descend intellectually. Now, I'm at a period of my life, for example, where I used to be interested in philosophy, and I used to be very interested in reading, but I did not knew that, and I never read anything, because people would, or teachers in school, for example, they would offer me to read something, but that something was not philosophy, and it was just a very bad book. Even to this day, I think this teacher would give me during summer vacation to read nonsense books, and I could never read. But when I was in a certain age, I realized that one teacher gave me a good book, and I read it in like 3 days. Well, it turns out I like reading, but I never just know. And because of this previous teacher offering me this bad book, I had this attitude toward books that they were bad, and I never attempted to read them because I assumed that all the other books were the same and all the other thoughts were the same. And I would spend my life most of the time just going to the gym and school and etc. normally, and I would never consider intellectual stuff because I had very superficial understanding about lots of things, and I didn't have an opinion. So what is most pitiful is when you are a fool and you consider yourself to be smart, and it is very sad to be there. That's when you are in the cave. That's when you are locked up. That's when you are chained, because you are on that consciousness. You are on that conscious level when you think that you have figured out it all. And you have the permanent answer. You have the answers that cannot be questioned. And that answers are the thing. And there is nothing more there. And that's when you go mad. And that's when you end up being one of those creatures of the cave that pays attention to the shadows that lives in this nonsense world and spends life quite pitiful. And what is beautiful about intellectual ascendance is that you realize that you really don't know anything, and there are so many questions, and there are so many unknowns, and there are so many opportunities out there. And I think fundamentally the cave example is the analogy which explains to us that when you don't know things, but yet you are taught, you are groomed into this belief that you should believe things without questioning them, and you should live in your small world, in your small cave, and never question anything, and just accept the common things, and just look at your fellow cavemen, whatever they believe in, and take it as a fact. And you are taught to basically hate the ones who tell you the truth. And in human history, there were some great teachers who taught the truth. I have Confucius in my mind right now as a great example. He was a great scholar and the teacher, and they teach people. But important thing I believe is also that from my personal experience, I've been in situations for years where I was in cave, and I put myself there, and I was surrounded by certain beliefs which were false, fundamentally false, and I realized that they were lie, and it was very hard for me to accept it. But I also struggled, and I believe that if you are willing to look at the shadow of the truth, at certain point you will be able to look at the truth. Look at the fact that the world is such a complicated place, and it's not just the right and wrong, and there is a lot is going on between them, and even more thing is going on outside of that, between this sort of good and bad. Because if you look at the world we live in, it's such a strange place. I mean, what we know based on correct science is just mind-boggling. It's just unbelievable. There are almost like so many planets out there, and I cannot imagine the number of planets there are. It's like unbelievable number of planets out there, unbelievable worlds, and we just move to this space, and there are so many unknowns there, and we don't understand even what is going on within our own hearts, and what's going on with our own heads, and we don't even control it. And how can we seriously discuss the other great things? But is not it pitiful when person surrounds himself with a cave within the cave and is not interested in all the things? I mean, I believe that most people are quite curious and they want to know. But because of unfortunate circumstances, because of upbringing, because they are born in cave, they are indoctrinated into certain thinking. But I believe that the internet era has changed a lot for some things for the bad, while some things for the good, because cave people also actively like to use their social media, and they like to spread their cave mentality. And I don't pay attention to these people, to be honest. I used to when I was younger, but I'm no longer interested in to listen to these people. But at the same time, there are so many other interesting things available for free. Some you can just pay like less than $20 and just buy a book, or buy some stuff, or you can just go to. But there are a lot of learning websites where you can go and learn more about the world and explore, learn new languages, learn new programs, learn new philosophy, etc. And all those things are coming together. And at the end of the day, the real world is there, and the cave world is also there. And finally, what is really interesting is mortality, and the fact that we have limited time, and seemingly might have very little to do with cave analogy. But sometimes I used to think about this analogy and I would imagine Plato standing in front of a sea in some Greek island or somewhere, and him witnessing alien spaceship just hovering, gigantic spaceship just hovering above the sea and just directly going up to space. And sometimes I like to think about this analogy this way, an image that the Plato and Socrates and all the great thinkers were on that island, and they all saw this spaceship, how it just hovered above the water and how it just went straight in space, and they imaged this thought and they thought something like, oh, maybe we are these people who are inside the cave and our thinking is too narrow-minded and we are too narrow-minded, and maybe the great world is where truly great gods live and this world is just an image. And to stay true to ourselves, one must acknowledge that it's not just Plato's cave analogy that proposes that the world is sort of illusion. Many other thoughts have considered this world to be sort of cave, something like cave or some sort of a lower world. There are different worlds out there, etc. And there was always this belief. And it's always interesting to think about it because asking these questions ultimately gives us answer to what it's like to be a human being and what it's like to be a one human being who, instead of being locked up in his own prison, tries to liberate himself and looks at the stars and tries to stay humble instead of giving himself some permanent answers which cannot be questioned and lock themselves into the cave. Because once they do that, it means that they have already gave up on themselves. My fellow citizens of all nations, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already, and comment down below what you think about Plato's cave analogy and how you like to think about the way he looked at the world.